No matter what you do, you can never catch up with the traffic jam in Cairo. It will take a long, long, long time before something like that happens. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this conference. My introductory remarks are very brief. I want to make 3 points. First, this is a conference that we are organizing jointly with the Arab Fund. I'm grateful to the Arab Fund for joining us in organizing this conference. I'm thankful to them also for hosting us in this fantastic building. They have always been very hospitable. I can promise you that the conference is going to give you a lot of food for thought. But this building, in terms of the art and how it looks, and the food that you're going to have will be, I don't know whether we can compete with that. Let's see. I also want to join Mr. Al-Hamad in thanking His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al-Sabah for inviting us for dinner tonight. And talking to him early this morning, I was told that there is no free lunch, meaning that we will be a captive audience and we'll have the pleasure of listening to somebody who knows everything about both monetary policy and fiscal policy in one. Usually you get either a minister of finance who is in a fight with the governor of a central bank, but when you get someone who has been in the two places, it's always interesting. I know that from experience myself. The speaker is going to be Sheikh Salim Abdulaziz Sabah. We are looking forward to it. And let me use this opportunity to thank Mr. Al-Hamad for something else, other than joining us or doing that conference with us and hosting us in this fantastic place. Mr. Al-Hamad has been to ERF a lot of things. He has been a good friend, he has been an unwavering supporter. He chairs our board. He has done for us more than anybody else. And I really do want to express my appreciation for the role he is playing in supporting the activities of ERF. We do care about creating knowledge for public interest. We are not serving anybody's interest. And it really is a pleasure to find someone who appreciates that, who actually takes the position and the stance that are consistent with that support. So I really want to thank you, Mr. Al-Hamad, for what you have been doing for ERF. I do believe that ERF would not have been the institution that it is without your support. I want to thank also Huda Slim and Ibrahim Al-Badawi for really carrying the burden of organizing this conference from a substantive point of view, in terms of the agenda, the speaker, and I do believe that we have a very good set of speakers that are going to talk about work that has taken quite a bit of time, and I do hope it will all work out as well as we wish. Let me move on to my second point, and it is related to the conference, to the topic of the conference. A few years ago, when we thought about doing research on a few themes, one theme we could not afford to miss out on. ERF is a regional institution that caters for Arab countries, Iran and Turkey. And a number of Arab countries are distinct in being gifted with natural resources, a lot of oil and a lot of natural gas. And if you are talking about the region and you want to be sincere to what you're doing, you cannot leave out totally covering the distinct characteristics and the features of the countries with natural resources. We have other themes that we have been working on also for quite some time, inequality and other things. But the one area that we started off with and continue for the last 5 to 7 years is the area of natural resources. And the point I want to make here in the context of the conference is, initially the big question was to deal with this issue of how do you turn the natural resources from a curse into a blessing? How do you avoid the pitfalls and the shortcomings of possibly being endowed with natural resources? And I think quite a bit has been done. The conference that Mr. Al-Hamid was referring to earlier was also on natural resources, and it was here in the Arab Fund. And essentially what people dealt with was the first generation of questions, things like, for instance, how do you reduce volatility of economic growth given the volatility of prices? How do you avoid a Dutch disease? How do you try to diversify? Questions of, these are the set of questions, anyway, fiscal and monetary policy when under these conditions. So it's all related to almost pure economics in some sense. Very little attention was given to the issue of institutions. So for us, the next generation of questions was to move from issues of policies to issues of institutions. At the end of the day, policies are not designed and carried out in a vacuum. They are carried by institutions. The two most important institutions in a country are the fiscal and monetary institutions, hence the work that's being presented today. So this is what's going to be presented today is a reflection of quite a bit of work on fiscal and monetary institutions, not the policies as such, as a second generation of questions to complement the work that was done earlier. And I thought that was an important point to make. Just two small comments related to this one is that there is a book that's upcoming that's edited by Ibrahim al-Badawi and Huda Slim on essentially avoiding the oil curse. But on the details of today's agenda, the sessions, the questions that are being asked, I would leave that to Ibrahim to take us through what we're going to go through during the day and tomorrow. He is more able to deal with that than I am. By the way, Ibrahim is our thematic leader. For each of the themes that we decided to focus on, we have one thematic leader, sometimes two or one and a half. So Ibrahim is our thematic leader on natural resources. So he knows exactly what's going on. So I'll let Ibrahim deal with that. Let me move on to my third and last comment. As someone who is interested in issues of institutions in general, I have an observation to make on a lot of the work that has been done in this area. And most of it had to do with making or showing in one way or another the point that institutions matter or governance matter. Ever since Douglas North started his work on transaction costs in the early 70s, and subsequently a lot of people have been doing a lot of work just to make the point that institutions matter. And I think they have been fighting a battle that was well established. Economists are well known for optimizing all the time. And they think that the world is under their fingertips. They can just decide what is right, and then the rest of the world will follow. Untrue. There is something else called the institutions. But most of the work, even empirically, not only do whether the word institutions takes on the form of a governance, for instance. Well, governance is some sort of institution. So whether it's formal or informal rules of the game, this is part of the formal rules of the game. It's the nature of governance. Disaggregating the governance and looking at whether it's the issue of accountability or the separation of powers or transparency or this or that, well, that's still working on the issue that institutions matter. Very few people do go beyond that. And they do ask the question, in which way institutions matter? That is, how they are designed. What are the rules? In which way the rules are enforced, either weakly or strongly? Do they have the capacity to implement these? So these issues, as soon as you get into how, then you get into really more interesting stuff, because this is where you gain a lot of insights. So beyond what we are offering today is really something that goes beyond institutions make a difference. They are important. We know they are important. The question is, how are they important? Perhaps the last related point to this one is that the issue of in the literature on natural resources, there is a lot of discussion of rentier states, the concept of a rentier state, and the consequences of rentier states. whether the consequences, economic consequences for one, or the political consequences. When you have a lot of resources, you probably can postpone democratization, for instance. Or, so this idea of rentier states and rent-seeking arrangements and rent allocation and the link between that and natural resources is something that a lot of people have written about quite extensively. And they stop at that. And that's not very useful either, because the more interesting point that is also covered in this conference that Adil is going to talk about it afterwards as our keynote speaker, is the issue of institutions, let's say monetary institutions or fiscal institutions, do not also exist in a vacuum. They do exist in a political setup. So the nature of the political regime, one would argue, does shape the nature of economic institutions. So the ranking of the logical link between things is that you have political institutions that determine rules and institutions, economic rules and institutions, and therefore economic outcomes. So politics is very key. The nature of a political regime does make a hell of a difference, both for policies and for economic institutions, and therefore for outcomes. And in this conference, perhaps one of the novelties is that not only are we talking about institutions, let's say central bank independence or not, that kind of stuff, or fiscal institutions, whether they have fiscal rules or not. No, it's actually more than that. You subject these two to the environment in which these institutions operate, which is the political environment. And I think by doing that, by offering you something about the nature of the political regimes and how that nature impacts the rest is important. And then after that, we will be digging into the fiscal institutions in their own right and the monetary institutions in their own right. And then I think by doing that, actually we are giving you quite a bit of a menu that will hopefully stimulate a lot of discussion. And if that discussion leads to something positive for the countries we care about, I think we would have done our job. Thank you very much.